What's your best true spooky story? Serious. At the time I was around 14. I'd asked my dad to wake me up early that morning at about 5 a.m. because I had some work to get done. That morning, I was woken up, and I flung my legs over the side of my bed. I felt a tug on both of them. What I thought at the time was just my dad trying to get me to hurry up. I reached over to pick up my phone and turned it on, 3:30 a.m., and I looked over at the black figure I assumed was my dad, and it was gone. I've posted this on my other account. Copying and pasting it here. The scariest thing I've had happen while camping. So I live in Eastern Oregon, and my mom lives in Western Oregon. I went to visit her for the summer and she's very outdoorsy, so we decided to take the 1-hour drive from her city to the coast. We end up at this free campsite at the top of this hill, huge foothills of the coastal mountains, about a 25-minute drive from the top where the campsite is to the bottom where the main road was, and we were the only campers there. We relaxed for the rest of the day, made food, etc. A truck full of men drive up the hill and talk with my mom. What about, wasn't suspicious at the time, and they leave us. Fast forward to the middle of the night. I wake up to my mom sitting straight up in the tent. I wake easily so I heard her gasp and it woke me. As soon as she saw I was awake she put her hand over my mouth because I was starting to ask her what's wrong. It was dead silent, and all of a sudden you hear footsteps right beside the tent. The little flap that covers the zipper was even moving. Thankfully, my mom has quick wits and said very loudly, "Kenny, grab the gun." Kenny is my dad, although that doesn't matter, and mind you he was not there, just us girls like I previously said. They left. No harm was done. Thank the Lord for my mama. 4 years ago, I lived in a very large farmhouse that was converted into 2 apartments. The house was known as the Old Boys' Home. It was used to house boys with behavioral issues but was closed due to allegations of molestation. Anyway, I was living with my boyfriend and 3-year-old daughter at the time. My bedroom had a large fireplace that had been boarded up and painted over. I decided to push my bed up against it one day while I was rearranging things. It was like a headboard. That night, around 1 a.m., I had heard a small voice saying, "Mom, Mom, Mommy." I had sat up in bed but didn't see anything, so I reached over my boyfriend trying to grab my daughter and put her in our bed. I kept feeling around, and I was still hearing the voice but I couldn't feel her. My boyfriend woke up and turned the bedside lamp on asking me, "What the hell are you doing?" I explained that Amelia was trying to get in our bed and I was reaching for her. There was nobody there. My daughter was sound asleep in her room. Then the next night came. Around 1 a.m. again my dog had started to whimper at outdoor, so my boyfriend got up to take him outside. You know that feeling in a bed when someone lies down next to you? Where the bed pushes in and there is a warmth in your back? I felt that. So I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed. I rolled over, my boyfriend wasn't in the bed and I felt the freaking bed release pressure. Whatever was laying next to me has gotten up in that second. I moved my bed the next day to the other side of the room and I never had another incident in the 2 years I remained in that house. When my grandparents bought their house for a family of 10, my grandpa found a fake wall upstairs. He tore it down to make more room for the family. Behind the wall were children's clothes and play toys, almost like they walked off the room in a hurry. My mom told me stories of sitting in her room and something circling the walls around her sounding like wallpaper being torn. When she moved out, my aunt moved into the same room. She would wake up with pictures she hung up laying on her chest in the morning. My cousins also have stories of hearing footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping outside their door in the middle of the night. I still don't go upstairs at their house because it's always cold and I get weird vibes up there. Even in my adult life I have scary dreams that take place in their upstairs. I posted this in a thread a while ago but gonna do it again because it applies here. When I was in high school, my uncle would throw me a couple bucks to help babysit his kids with my aunt. They lived in a 2-story house by the water, nice area. The kids were about 3 and 6. One day I was sitting in their den on my phone, when I started to hear a baby crying. Thinking it was the 3-year-old, I headed to the bottom of the stairs to check and see if my aunt was up there dealing with it. I called for her a couple times with no response. The baby kept crying. I called for her one more time, and when I got no response I started walking up the stairs. Then I heard my cousins and aunt playing outside. All the hairs on my body stood up and I literally felt a chill run down my spine. I quietly turned around, walked down the stairs, got in my car and drove away. The baby was still crying when I closed the door behind me. A few years later I was drunk at a family party and told my uncle the story. He told me that he and his wife used to hear the baby too, and apparently the previous owners had a kid die of SIDS in that room upstairs. He's uber Catholic and had a mass said for the baby. He said after that it never happened again. Still gives me the willies when I talk about it though. Back when I was a kid, my grandmother had a really close friend who used to help her babysit us. One day she goes missing. Family doesn't know where she is and we don't either. About a week later, police find her body in a dumpster. She had been dead for 4 to 5 days. She had been mugged and had several stab wounds. Incredibly tragic. Who would mug an old lady? Here's the spooky story. A few days just before she was found, my 3 cousins swore they saw her walking around in their backyard and knocking on their window. The following day had search going through the area. It wasn't until the body was found that we realized what they saw couldn't be true according to police timeline, but they swore it was her. I have a bunch, but I think the best one I have actually happened to my mom. We lived in a very creepy, very old house when I was little. One day my mom was cleaning my little brother's room while we were at school, and every single one of his electronic toys turned on all at once. 2 of them did not have batteries in them. She was so freaked out she had us camp out in the living room for 3 days because she didn't want my brother alone in his room. Up until we moved, that would occasionally happen. Either 1 or 2 toys at a time. Freshman year at my university. We had a creepy, old dorm on campus that no one was living in. Everyone generally avoided it because it just had an uncomfortable feeling when you got close to it and felt like you were being watched. There are rumored stories about 2 women dying there on separate occasions. 1 murder, 1 suicide. And they're the ones who haunt the building. One night, a friend was in a bad mood because his girlfriend had broken up with him, so I was walking around campus with him to let him get it off his chest and just trying to help him feel better. We walked past the dorm and I brought it up about it being haunted, and was telling him the stories to try and take his mind off it. So, the way the bottom floor was set up, there were 2 doors on both sides of the building, and the hallway ran the entire length of the building and you could see the other door. We walked up to one of the windows and were just looking down the hall when 2 girls walked out of a room, wearing clothes that looked like they were from the 70s/80s and stood there in the hall looking at each other, not speaking. Then, one girl slowly turned her head and looked straight at us, slowly turned her head back, then turned and walked the opposite way from us down the hall. So we ran to the other side of the building, but we couldn't find them. We came back to the original door and watched them do the same thing all over again. We looked at each other and ran. This freaked me out for a while, especially after, when I was sleeping in my room and all my posters fell off the wall at the same time. After telling this story to another friend, he convinced me to go back with him and try to find a way in. We found an open window, which we later found out was the room the girl hung herself in, and climbed in and started walking down the hall. We wandered around the building a bit and just started to notice generally creepy things. Water faucets started coming on, we'd walk through one room and then back through and a chair would be moved. On the first floor, a desk was turned upside down under the stairwell. As we were getting close to leaving, a lot more water faucets came on and kept getting louder and louder. Then when we got back to the room to go back out of the window, and as we put our hands on the window, the door slammed closed. So we ripped the door open, dove out and ran back to our dorm. And never went back. My high school used to be a giant mansion before it was converted into an orphanage and then a high school. One section of the school, the 3rd floor, was inaccessible. The staircase which led to the floor was blocked off with wood and painted black to match the chorus room where it was located. In 2003, during the fall school show of Les Mis, they had to remove the wood so they could replace the windows on that 3rd floor. We even ended up using some of the removed windows for our barricade. We had play practice most nights, and, if you lived far enough away, usually you would just stay at the school and wait, rather than go home just to come right back up. While waiting for practice to start one night, myself and 3 friends, Ryan, Mike, and Michelle, decided to go up the staircase to check out the 3rd floor. The staircase was rotted and falling apart from years of disuse, so we carefully went up one at a time to find an unremarkable hallway with some even less remarkable rooms off to the sides. All of this led into a big open area with old, stacked desks and folders full of test papers from like the 80s or something. The four of us were a bit disappointed, because the rumor was that this section of the school was not converted from the orphanage that occupied the space several decades earlier, and the ghosts of orphans still haunted the place. Since we didn't get spooked, we ended up just digging through the old papers. While Michelle was looking through the papers in a side room with her back to us, Ryan pushed Mike and myself out of the room quietly and into an adjacent room to scare Michelle into thinking we disappeared. Sure enough, she comes bolting out of the room screaming at us, throwing out, "Screw you guys," and, "This isn't funny." We had to muffle our mouths to keep from laughing, when, all of a sudden, one of the people in the room effing ruined the whole thing by giggling like a little girl. I turned to Ryan and Mike to see which one of them ruined the joke, but both of their hands were over their mouths and their eyes were wide as dinner plates. This room we were in, hiding behind the door, was small. Maybe the side of a small, one-stall bathroom. Maybe that's what it was once upon a time. And somebody in this god-darn tiny room was giggling and it was none of us. This whole plot played out in probably like 10 seconds between leaving Michelle and hearing the giggle. So we stood there staring at each other waiting for something to happen that explained this. It was like 4 or 5 p.m. and we were the only ones in the chorus classroom the entire day. We would have seen someone go upstairs. We would have heard the stairs creaking as they went up there. Whoever giggled at us from inside that room was up there already. Unfortunately, we didn't get the explanation we needed because a second set of giggles started happening, this time more than one person making them. That was it for Ryan, a big, tough former athlete turned show kid, who screamed the highest pitch scream I've ever seen a guy that size make. It would have been funny if we weren't terrified. He pushed past us, ran screaming out into the hallway, scared the daylights out of Michelle on his way down and we bolted down the steps. This time, we did not take them one by one and actual chunks of rotted wood started falling off. We explained what happened to Michelle, and then went somewhere that was not the Chris classroom until play practice started. The maintenance team must have known we were up, because we all collectively got a talking to about going up there. Safety concerns with the rotted steps. So of course, people started going up there willy-nilly hoping to see a ghost. There are more stories about that third floor during that year that promptly stopped once they replaced the windows and sealed the room back up. Now the school is closed and empty, so whatever ghosts were having a good time are now free to do so without the living getting in the way. About 5 years and 2 boyfriends ago, I moved into an old farmhouse with my then significant other. He was a hoarder and was embarrassed about the state his house was in after his wife left him. He had an RV and that's where he slept, because there was just crap, garbage, clothes, boxes, up to your knees in every room of the house. Me, being extremely distressed by clutter, cleaned that house. Down to cobwebby corners of the ceiling. It took me weeks but I Murphy's oiled every inch of wood, filled his truck with over 10 loads of garbage. The very first night I was there, things were weird. At that point I had only cleared part of the living room. The boyfriend snored unbearably loud so I opted to sleep inside, on the couch, while he slept out in his camper. I had just had a fight with my mother, and was lying awake around 4 a.m. fuming about it. I heard my boyfriend come in the back door, muttering to himself as usual. He was opening and closing drawers and cabinets in the kitchen, figured he was searching for something. Finally, I got up because hell, I was already awake, maybe I could help him find whatever it was. The kitchen was 5 feet from where I was and when I walked in, there was no one there. I looked around and called for him, but he wasn't there. I don't get scared easily, and at this point I was just curious about where he was. I went out the camper and could hear him snoring hard before I even got to the door. I shook him awake and asked him gently what he had needed in the house. He said he hadn't left the camper all night. I thought, he was sleepwalking. When I went back inside though, I noticed it had snowed lightly in the night, and the only tracks leading up to the camper were mine. Couple days later, I moved my 2 cats in. They are super on edge, a lot of growling, acting out of character, especially in the middle of the night. I completely dismissed that as it was a new, unfamiliar place, obviously they were uncomfortable. I had finally gotten the bedroom habitable and they would not cross the threshold into it. The first night we slept in the bedroom, was when I started to fear the house. The bed was up against a window that faced out to the cornfield, and my guy insisted on sleeping on the outside of the bed, leaving me pressed against the window. I got this horrible feeling. Something was right outside the window and I was frantic to the point of tears. I kept telling him there was something out there and he said I was being dramatic, which was stupid, because I'm just not. You spend your whole life being logical and calm, and when something weird happens, no one believes you. I slept on the couch. The next day, I noticed a handprint on the top of the bedroom window that I had just cleaned the day prior. I held my hand up to it and it was thrice the size of my own hand, bigger than any person's handprint I've ever seen. It wasn't just a print, though. It was elongated, as if the hand had dragged down the window. Still could be an explanation. Even though I had cleaned that window the day before and would have noticed. Except the print was over 9 feet off the ground directly over an open coal cellar. I showed my boyfriend and he told me something surprising. His ex-wife thought there was something wrong with the house too. She was making dinner one day and he had gotten home from work, her back was turned to him and they had a full conversation. Then she looked out the kitchen window and saw him pull up in his truck. He still blew it off with me, just telling me I was paranoid and such. All this time, I assumed he was right, dismissed my instincts and went about things normally. Then, one morning in the spring, I got up to use the bathroom. It was 4:46 in the morning, and I knew the time because I checked my phone when I got up. The whole bedroom was lit from the sunrise and I quietly climbed back into bed. The house is all wood paneling, and because of my arachnophobia I had the bed scooted about 5 inches away from the wall where our heads were. I laid down and tucked my arm up under the pillow with my hand over the edge. The second I closed my eyes, an icy cold hand grabbed me by the wrist and yanked down. Hard. I bolted up and in a state of complete terror, shook my boyfriend awake and asked if he was screwing with me. He wasn't. I will never forget that grip because I had to struggle to get my hand back. I called my close friend and she said, "You know that there's a cemetery within view of your bedroom, right?" I had forgotten, but being a practical person it had never occurred to me that there might be a connection. She said, "Let's try something." Came over with a sage brush and we smudged the house. We were both laughing at ourselves as we did it, but the thing is, nothing weird happened after that. Well, except me falling into a hole in the floor. But I blamed that on my own clumsiness. The relationship withered, I moved out, but we remain friends. He says nothing strange has happened since I left. In high school my friends and I were messing around with a Ouija board one night. We had done it before and nothing remarkable had ever happened. We usually did it to try and scare each other or our girlfriends. We all thought it was a joke. That night, there was no one else home except the 7 of us, and we were all together around the board. One of the girls there wanted to try it. She had never done it before. This time was different. The board misspelled some of the words the same way every time. It gave answers that seemed really historically accurate for our town. Things we neither knew or cared about. Long story short, the spirit claimed it was a 10-year-old boy who had died on the property in the 1800s and was buried there too in an unmarked grave. My friend's house was on a farm in the edge of town. We were all a little freaked out because the board had never been so detailed and consistent. However, we were still skeptical, and we were all assuming one of us was trying to scare the rest. Finally, my friend asked if the spirit could do something to prove he was there with us. It went to yes, and then spelled out, knock. Then the planchette stopped moving. We just all stared at it silently and then there was a rap on the window right next to us. The lights were on outside and there was absolutely no one out there. We never touched that effing board again.